Welcome, everybody. My name is Steve Teresi. I'm the Director of Training and Technical Services at JL Audio. I am located in South Florida, just a few miles north of our main headquarters that's down in Miramar, Florida. Today with me, I have Mr. Kevin Ferry up in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. Say hello, Kevin.
Hello, everybody.
I think he's dealing with some sporadic rain in his area. I have Rob Haynes over in Southern California. Say hello, Rob.
Good afternoon, everybody.
He's in Southern California and it never rains there.
7 degrees and partly cloudy right now.
A beautiful day as always. So I'm down in Southern Florida and we have thunderstorms all around the area. So if I drop off, you know why. But I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We have WebEx going and we have a few people in our WebEx chat. Kevin and I will be monitoring the chat there while Rob does our presentation today. We also have Facebook Live going on. And again, Kevin and I are going to be minding that chat as well. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and use the chat function on WebEx or the comments section in Facebook, and we'll get on those questions as quickly as we possibly can. If we don't answer it, we may have forgot, so ask it again, or we might refer to our technical support team to get some of the more detailed questions that you may have, just for brevity. If it's something that we think that Rob should say during the presentation, we'll let him know. But be mindful that Rob cannot see any of the comments while he's presenting. He won't see all the crazy things we say about him until after he's done sharing his screen. So if you need to get his attention, you'll do that through Kevin or myself. I think that's everything, right? I missing anything?
I think so.
Cool. Well, I'll go ahead and let Rob take over now. So Rob, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us today, everyone. This is a really cool session. Really, it's an overview about the mobile speaker family at JL Audio. The idea of this training actually came about from feedback that I found searching the JL Audio groups. And, a common question that I would see come up on JL for Life, for example, is what do I gain if I go from a C1 to a C2? Or what do I gain when I move from C5 to C7? So this is kind of an overview of the speaker family on the car side. So it's not super in-depth, but we'll talk about some of the different characteristics of each of the speaker families out there, the benefits of the materials used, the design thoughts behind each of those series, to really educate our dealers and the end users, the consumers, as to which is the right JL Audio speaker for them in terms of both budget and the performance they're looking to achieve. But before we can get into all of that, we are going to talk a bit about how a speaker works and some of the engineering aspects of JL Audio speakers. So with that said, I guess we can get started with how a speaker works. And this is a really common view when you see a speaker. It's assembled. You don't get to see all of the different parts. So I was able to reach out to our R&D team, and they were Mike West was very nice enough to loan me a couple of exploded line art images he had of a C7 650 woofer. And this is actually a really cool image because it really does break down the parts of a speaker. And there really isn't that many parts that are required, but they all have a rather significant role into making the speaker work properly. And the first part I want to talk about is the motor. And you think of a motor, you think of like an engine under the hood, right? Hundreds, if not thousands of parts moving and doing all sorts of crazy things. But for a speaker motor, it's a stationary piece. It's just a giant magnet. It's there to create a stationary magnetic field for the voice coil to work with or against. Typically magnets, they're rather large. You were also starting to see now as speakers are becoming smaller, a shift to neodymium based magnets such as you find on our C7 350 mid-range drivers to help make a smaller speaker that's easier to install. And there's other benefits to that as well. But really the motor, it's just a big stationary magnet. And that's really the main intent of that. The motor itself is going to mount to the basket or the frame of the speaker. And this is a very important piece because really it holds everything together. On top of just holding everything together, it's a key piece to make sure everything is in a linear movement. It helps control the suspension to make sure when the speaker moves up and down or in and out, that it's just straight in and out. There's no sideways or crooked movements that could cause mechanical and acoustical issues with the driver. And if you do some cool design, cool design tips and tricks, you can actually do some cool things like we have elevated frame cooling where we've designed on a good amount of our speakers that it is very, dun, 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 But elevated frame cooling on a good amount of our speaker frames that we use help cool the top plate of the motor and push cooler air onto the voice coil. So it's not just to hold everything together, but you can actually do some cooling tips and tricks with that as well. A very key part of the speaker now is the suspension. And I actually am going to blow this image up into multiple pieces, because what we don't see in that first shot is the voice coil, because it's behind the spider. The voice coil is essentially tightly wound copper wire that's wound around a former. Could be, materials for the formers vary. Doesn't really matter for the purpose of this training. But essentially, we want a tube, so we can wind this copper wire around it in a tight manner and create a nice tight coil. Now the former itself is going to be attached to the spider. That's the yellow cloth material that you see in the center there. And that's one of the two key components of the speaker's suspension system. It's going to help control the speaker's movement, its excursion, so how far the speaker can move inwards and outwards, but it also controls that. Again, the linearity of the speaker. It helps ensure that that inward and outward motion is perfectly straight, that it's not straying and moving sideways or at an angle or in a way we don't want, which could cause mechanical pieces to start rubbing against one another or affecting the overall sound quality of the speaker. So that's a very, very key component there. One you typically don't get to see because it's behind the speaker's cone, and so you don't get to normally see that. So speaking of the cone, this is the second piece of the suspension. The cone is actually surrounded by the surround of the speaker. Typically, again, this will be a foam or a rubber type material, and with the spider, essentially the cone of the speaker attaches to the top of that voice coil former. So the cone itself is going to move up and down with the former, and the surround, which goes around the edge of the cone, attaches it to the basket. And the surround combined with the spider are what are going to control the amount of movement that the speaker has inwards or outwards, so how much excursion it has, and again, help control the linearity of it. The cone itself, that's what's moving the air. That's what's moving air molecules that hit our drums and allow us to hear. And again, we'll get into some of the different materials and design aspects later on that are key to make all of, that's really key to make a speaker sound good. So now that we know the parts of the speaker, how does it all work? Well, it's pretty cool. We talked about the motor being a stationary magnet. So when you run AC voltage through copper wire, it will create a little bit of a magnetic field. And when you take that copper wire and you wind it up tightly, like it is in a voice coil, it'll create a stronger magnetic field because you have all of that wire, all of that energy going through the wire that creates a field. So when you have that, and you have this magnetic field now that's being created around a voice coil using AC voltage, because that's what leaves the amplifier, right? So music, when it leaves an amp, whether it's the amp built in your source unit or it's a standalone amplifier, it is actually AC voltage that's going from the amplifier to the speaker. And when that AC voltage alternates its polarity, that changes the magnetic field coming from the coil. And being that the coil in most speakers is going to be in the middle of that big donut magnet, in more radically designed speakers like our TW5 series, that's actually suspended around the outside of the magnet, which is pretty cool, and that's a whole nother training in itself.
I was going to say, a lot of what you're sharing about how a speaker goes together, not always.
Yeah, most.
The most traditional ways, yeah, no doubt, but it's really good what you've covered so far.
Yeah. So if we look at this image here, we can see we have a voice coil in the middle of a stationary magnet, and we now know with AC voltage that there's going to be a magnetic field coming out from that voice coil. So this is a cool chart that kind of is a good way to envision AC voltage and how the voice coil then reacts to it. So when we have AC voltage leaving the amplifier, we have a positive peak and a negative peak. And it's not really negative, it's just voltage going the other way, but we'll call it that to keep it simple right now. So looking at the chart here, if we're at 0, that's the resting point of the speaker. We have nothing going on. When AC starts to leave the amplifier, it creates a positive magnetic field, and that voice coil is going to push against that stationary magnet. And as the voltage increases, as we start to go up to 45 and 90, the stronger that magnetic field becomes against that stationary motor magnet, the more the speaker is going to move out until it hits its peak. Then, when the AC current alternates its polarity, that's going to cause the voltage, the strength of that magnetic field to decrease, which is then going to bring the speaker back in. And then we hit the other direction for our voltage, which is again going to cause the speaker to now move further down based off of that magnetic field repelling against that stationary magnet. So it's kind of really cool when you think about that. I mean, in theory, speakers are very easy to make. You need a magnet, you need a bunch of copper wire, a toilet paper roll, something to hold that together, and a paper plate. Anybody with those materials can make a speaker because it's just creating an alternating magnetic field. Now, the key to making it sound good, that's where proper engineering comes into play. And all JL Audio speakers, whether it's our C1 up to the C7, all of our subwoofers, our home products, our marine products, if it's any sort of JL Audio loudspeaker, it has been developed by our extremely talented team in South Florida that is still led by Lucio, the L from JL Audio, our founder and chief engineer. And Lucio's, him and his very talented team of engineers that he's assembled there, they're responsible for all of our speakers. We don't just go to a factory and start picking pieces off a shelf and say, bam, there's our new speaker. Everything we do, and there's nothing wrong with that, mind you. There is a business model that allows certain companies to hit price points. It makes sense for certain consumers, but that's not how we do things at JL Audio. We are at heart an engineering company. We employ more engineers than we do people in like sales, customer service, marketing, tech training combined. We're an engineering company at heart, and that's where we've always been, and it'll always be that way, and it's something we're extremely proud about. Obviously, as we talk about it a lot. But one of the cool things in our Florida facility is the speaker development. And again, everything from the initial design ideas, material testing, speccing out the components, till small parameter testing, listening tests, and whether it's specific test vehicles or environments, that's all part of the process. And the nice thing about all of that is it's in-house. We have access to all of this stuff. It's instantaneous development. It allows us to improve if a speaker comes back from the field defective because it was, in many cases, probably amps weren't set properly, or it exceeded mechanical limits due to whatever the case may be. It allows our engineers to immediately take it into the back and look at the product. What failed? What could we do differently to improve on that? So it's not just developing, how the speaker sounds, but the longevity. As you guys know, we don't come out with new products every year or two. A lot of our products, our SKUs, our lines, they have 3, 4, 5, 6 year shelf life. Some of our products, some of our speakers have been around for 10 years now? TR was almost 18 years until C1 replaced it a few years ago. Because if you design it right from the start and maintain that upkeep by looking at that ones that have come back and failed and work on improvements, you can make a bulletproof product. And you can do that when you have in-house engineering like we do.
TR was old enough to drive.
Yeah. It became an adult and we kicked it out.
As soon as it turned 18, it had to go out.
So, but for me, I wanted to cover that kind of stuff, being that we're going to start talking about the JL lineup. So kind of just explains the core functions of how a speaker works, and then how some of the different materials and design processes used are factored into all of that. So with that said, yes, Steve?
Do you want to talk about how long we've been making speakers?
Ooh, well, we've been making speakers a long time, since at least the late 90s, if I remember. But one thing actually, before we get into talking about our current speaker lineup, Steve was very kind enough to show Kevin and I some new speaker materials that he has stumbled across. Would you mind sharing us these new product information you have, Steve, from when was it again? New product from 2001?
Right, so I'm going to show everybody all of it because it was just a stroll down memory lane. So it's not for today's training, but here's some new stealth boxes. Yeah, that's an old stealth box there. There's our old address. Some band pass. These are the pilot programs from some of our early subwoofer boxes. I love the retail prices. Those are great. So some of those are funny. Yeah, look at that.
New speakers.
Fun component systems. This is from 1991, guys. So that's a long time ago. CT1s. Man, oh man, that's an old one, that's for sure. But we've been doing this a long time. The XO2 crossover. I remember all of this. And we had different positions on the crossovers then. Rob's going to talk about that as we go forward a little bit. The old infinite baffle drivers. And then we had coaxial speakers too. So even back then, we were using better designs on the crossovers. So we've been at this a long time. I think that's
Absolutely.
it. I think that's all I got. So yeah, I thought that was cool. And in preparation for today's training, I figured let me break out some of these things and share them.
40 watts RMS.
Yeah, baby. Well, hey, you know what? Considering the time, that was actually pretty robust.
Right.
Oh yeah, fun stuff for sure.
All right. So let me go back to sharing the keynote here. Are we good?
I think so.
You see JL Audio speakers?
We do.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for the stroll down memory lane there, Steve. We always like to point out how old you are and how long you've been with the company.
So this is the book that I had found, my old binder when I worked in retail. So.
For those of you that don't know, Speaker Warehouse was the chain of car stereo stores that Jim and Lucio owned back in the 90s and was a key part of JL Audio's growth, being able to sell it to retail to the masses, and also known for all of the installations of those legendary cars that won Iasca and all the other sound offs from back in the day. All of that work happened at Speaker Warehouse. So it's a cool part of our history that doesn't get talked about a lot these days, but a key part of our company's history and growth.
Segue into what you're about to share as well, because a lot of the work that we've done that was done back then when Lucio and his team were developing products for the mobile audio world. Keep in mind, this is like mid 80s into the early 90s when a lot of this formational stuff was, foundational stuff was starting to happen. We used cars that came into the retail store as test vehicles to see what designs and what materials worked out best. And we say this very often, that JL Audio is very focused as an application company, that there's certain applications for these products, and the relationship that Rob just alluded to with Speaker Warehouse and JL Audio was exactly that. Lucio and his team would develop some ideas and say, here guys, put these in some cars to get some feedback from the customers and see what they like and what they don't like, and then we'll modify and we'll make it better. And reliability, performance, feature set, whatever it may be, it all came from the customers that we were dealing with in and out, day in and day out. It was happy that I was a very small part of that back in the day, but those show cars were a big part of it for sure.
I think, before I get into the actual different lines here, one thing that Steve brought up that's extremely important, when he talked about, applications, that's a key element to the design process of our speakers. Lucio and the team in Florida, they don't design these speakers for soundboards to sound, they're designed for the car. So when you listen to our speakers, at least on a board, a demo display, you're probably not going to get the same experience as you would in a vehicle where they're designed for an infinite baffle type application in a door being off axis. So, just keep that in mind. These are designed purposely for the car, a car application, a car installation, door, rear deck, infinite baffle type setup, not a small sealed enclosure like you'll typically find on a soundboard or a demo display. So even an entry-level C1 type product, which is far from entry-level, even though it's entry-level for us, that design aspect from the start is all about the performance in the car, which is interesting because really the demo is what woos a lot of consumers into buying the products they hear on the boards. but that's not where they're going to be listening to it. And that's why our team designs them specifically for the car. So if you can, always try to listen to our speakers in a car, because they're going to sound great on boards, but you're going to get that real experience that Lucio and the team was really looking for when you get them properly installed and done right in a vehicle. So with that said, C1 we released back in 2017, if I remember correctly. And the whole idea for C1 was, one, to replace TR. As we joked earlier, it was 18 years old, it was an adult, we kicked it out of the house, and it was time to kind of add some fresh life to the entry level, if you will, part of our speaker lineup. And C1 is a great job at that. It's an extremely cost-effective, I look at it as an everyday replacement type speaker. So if you're looking to replace your blown factory speakers or have just a small upgrade to get a little extra performance without breaking the bank or needing a difficult installation, that's really where C1 comes into play. It's a replacement speaker. We've made that easy. Our team did a lot of research and investment into all the different fitment guides that are out there to make sure that we supplied you guys with the proper tools to install C1 speakers, which means all of the different adapter plates. I mean, in a perfect world, you shouldn't have to fab up plates to install these speakers. Again, they're designed to be OEM replacements or OEM replacement upgrades. So you don't want an installation that costs 3 times the price of the speaker because you're having to fabricate all of your mounting materials. So, that's why on the 6x9s, for example, we have the different tabs for the Toyota and Dodge style mounts. The C1 650s, you can mount it as a 6-inch by itself or use the adapter plates for 6.5 and 6 3/4 inch plates for those larger doors. So what's interesting about this replacement aspect is you get all of these different plates to ease the installation. But a question that comes up often is, why are there no grills on C1? And the idea with C1 is, if it's a factory replacement, you already have a grill. It's in your door, it's in your rear deck. And really what we did was we put that extra cost into something that 99% of the time will be thrown away into the adapter plates to further ease the installation of this product.
One thing I just want to add, and I think you kind of touched on it, is this is an excellent replacement speaker for that factory upgrade. But the reality is there are cheaper replacement speakers as well, but they wouldn't be JL Audio. We couldn't really get much less than what you see here and still be comfortable putting our name on it. In other words, it's a performance threshold that we needed to achieve, and the materials that you're about to get into will kind of speak into a lot of that. You're not going to find what we're doing at less expensive product, and you won't find the performance either. There's some cool options out there, no doubt, and at more aggressive price points, but they're not what we would consider JL Audio level.
Yep, absolutely. One of the nice design aspects of C1 is a true aluminum dome tweeter with a silk surround. Again, typically when you get into around the price points of C1 or less, you're going to find plastic-based materials or lower quality metal dome. I love that I'm more of a silk guy typically, but I think for C1, an aluminum dome makes a lot of sense, because if it's a factory replacement type scenario, I typically find that those users are listening to satellite radio, FM, MP3s, content or mediums that have high frequency compression. So this aluminum dome helps bring some extra energy and pizzazz back, if you will, to those higher frequencies. Now, a potential downside to a metal dome tweeter is it can be fatiguing after a while. It can hurt your ears. It can be aggressive. And this silk surround that we've done along the edge of the tweeter helps kind of tame that. It dampens it. Really, the edge of the tweeter is where you're going to get that aggressiveness. And by going to silk, it helps smooth things out on the C1. So you get that extra energy from the metal dome, but you don't get a lot of the negatives because of that silk surround controlling and taming that over aggressiveness that you may find. So a very, very nicely designed tweeter. Even, again, I'll put it in quotes, an entry-level product, because it's entry-level for us. It's our first line, but again, it's far from entry-level. The other nice thing about C1, the idea of it being an entry or a OEM replacement type speaker, is they're designed to be efficient. They work very well in low power applications. And I remember the very first time I heard a pair of C1 650s, Eric Cole in our tech support department had just gotten his white Honda Civic, and he was getting ready to put his system in it. And the engineers gave him a pair of C1 650s, said, put it in your car. We want to hear it in a vehicle. It was like the first pre-production run. We want to hear him. So I sat in Eric's car one of my trips to Florida right after he put them in. I said, let me hear these C1s. And it was loud. It was dynamic. It was clean. Good amount of bass. So I was like, the bass is what threw me off. I was like, oh, wow. That sounds really good. Did you put that RD 404 in? And he says, no, that's all off the Honda deck power. I said, wait, what? I seriously thought he had put an RD amplifier in because he was doing that also, but he hadn't gotten to that step yet. Off of whatever Honda Civic deck power is, I thought these things were fully amplified. That's how efficient and fantastic they are in low power applications, and they sound even better when you get that extra power from a standalone JD-RD XDV2 type amplifier on them. So moving on to the C2 side of things, one of my favorite lines and one that I feel kind of gets overlooked a lot, and there's a lot of good applications for the C2 family. Now this is going to have a different characteristic than the C1s, mostly because of the 3/4 inch Silk Dome tweeter. One other nice thing about C1 real quick, they're all 3/4 inch tweeters other than the 6x9 options. The 6x9 coaxials and components use a 1-inch tweeter to help compensate for that larger cone on the 6x9 and the more aggressive upper mid-range that you may find on that. All of the other C1 tweeters are a 3/4 inch. We are using a 3/4 inch Silk Dome on the C2, and Silk Dome tweeters tend to yield more natural, smoother sounding results. Again, this is more personal preference. I find people, they either like the extra energy of the metal domes or they find it annoying. I'm a little in the middle, but the C2, if you're into a more smooth, natural, you don't want that extra emphasis maybe in the high frequency domain, C2 is a great option. To me, they're very similar to the C5, just not as refined, which should be expected being it's at a lower price point than the big brother C5 speakers are. What we do gain when we move to the C2 side of things are true two-way passive crossover networks on the component speakers. High quality components inside. If I remember correctly, on the C2s, you have up to 3 different tweeter level adjustments. So if you like the smoothness, but you want a little more energy, you can make those adjustments via that passive crossover network. Which brings up a key point, you know, when you're dealing with passive crossovers, I know it's easy to just mount it in the door and call it a day, but that's probably the worst place we could put a passive network. One, if you're in a place like Florida, it rains a lot, or Seattle, where it's heavy rain all the time, and water does get in the doors, and that can cause rust on the crossover components. There's a lot of vibration and rattles in the doors. Take the extra time, run speaker wire directly into the doors, and mount the crossover somewhere in the vehicle where they're not exposed to the elements, but also easily accessible. Because if you do put these in and you listen to them and you're like, oh man, I want to make a change to that tweeter, you don't want to tear your doors apart. You know, hide them somewhere where they're safe but accessible so you have access to those tweeter controls on the C2 or mid-range and tweeter on the C3 and C5 ones. But it also helps make sure that the crossover is not going to break or get damaged over time due to the rough, wet, bumpy potential environment the insides of a door maybe. But really nice smooth line. C2 also has that extremely sought after 4x6 option for you guys still running those old Chevy trucks from the 90s. But a really nice...
Some good trucks, man.
I know, you're still running one. But a really good option also, you know, I think a lot of good options for C2. If you have the budget for C5s up front, I think C2s make a great rear fill speaker because you're going to have that similar sonic characteristic, but it's a little more friendly on the budget for rear fill. But just a very nice, smooth, dynamic, nice sounding line of speakers. Moving to the C3 side of things, this is actually a good, I guess, a middle ground speaker. It kind of caters to everyone. Steve's called it the utilitarian speaker of the lineup. Yes, you got the C7s that are the Ferrari, and C1s, this vehicle. C3s, it's like that Silverado F-150, just your rugged, solid pickup that you can beat up. And that's really what the C3s are all about. Some cool things first that I like about C3 is that it's a convertible design. That means by removing that phase plug and inserting the tweeter cup, you can decide if you're going to run these as either a component set or as a coaxial, which helps ease up the installation options. Of course, with the coaxial, you still have that passive crossover network you're going to use. So if you did 2 pairs of C3s, you can set it up for components up front, coaxials for the rear. From a retailer perspective, that's nice because it's less SKUs that you need to stock and invest in, which helps with your inventory flow, which is always nice from the retail side of things. But really just nice, well-balanced system. Another cool design aspect with this coaxial, being that we have a coaxial using a passive crossover network, you could actually ditch that now and go active with coaxials, which is hard to do with a lot of other coaxials because the filtering's built in to the wiring of the tweeter and all of that. And if you can't do 3-way speakers up front where you have a woofer mid-range tweeter, going active with a coaxial, like a C3, C5 down below, with an extra imaging tweeter up above that you can attenuate is a great way to have your proper sound stage height, but without breaking it up from the tweeters and mid-range being so far apart from one another. That's actually what I did in my first car. I had C5 coaxials running active with C5 tweeters up above, heavily attenuated, so I didn't really hear them, but it brought up the coaxial sound stage, and it was a really nice setup that our tech support team recommends if you can't do a 3-way active system. So that's something very easy to do with the C3 side of things.
One thing I like, Rob, but you changed. You changed it too fast.
I'm fast,
There
man.
you go. If you look carefully at the center of each one of the speaker images that are there, you can see the connection point for the tweeter. And something that Rob sort of touched on that I always thought was kind of neat is, it's convertible. Obviously, you can take the phase plug out and put the tweeter in and vice versa. But the reality is, as a consumer, you're not going to do that. But as a consumer going into a retail store, the retailer actually has the ability to take that tweeter off so you can actually look at it, which I think is really cool because usually if you have the separates mounted, you can't really take the tweeter out and actually see what you're getting. So I always thought that was a neat thing that you could actually tap onto that right there and pull it up and look at it. I just thought it was cool.
Absolutely. You can definitely see the quality when you can feel and touch instead of just looking at something as small as a tweeter that's attached to a coaxial.
Yep.
So one of the unique things with the C3 side of things, I would say they're a little more aggressive. Again, this kind of falls into that utilitarian speaker approach where it sounds great, but they're definitely probably the loudest speakers in our mobile family. And I call them the enthusiasts. If you're the kind of listener that just wants to rail, you want to just, it's loud, there's impact, whether it's Buckethead or Dead Mouse like Steve or, this type of, where you just want to have fun and you don't really care as much about the nuances and intricate details that a C7 type product may have. This is the speaker for you. C3s are a lot of fun. And not saying our other speakers are not as fun. But one thing I found, the more clinical you get, you do lose a little bit of that fun aspect because, we want to feel the bass, even if it's not part of the natural recording. We want that loudness that may not always be accurate. So that's where, for me, the C3s really come into play. We did put an extra emphasis in the upper mid-range on them, and we've also done a larger 1-inch silk dome tweeter. So you get that extra energy in the top end, which does help for those guys that want to be loud. So I always see online, I want to be loud, what should I get? C3s. They're a little, they're
Day of the week and twice on Sundays.
yeah. And what's great about them is they're designed for that. They can take the beating. They're, again, that F-150 analogy. You can't jump a Ferrari when you go off-roading, but you can jump an F-150 if the suspension's done right, I guess. But absolutely. One of the nice other benefits with C3 is when we upgrade to a nicer passive crossover network. This actually has some, in addition to 4 tweeter level controls, we've also added 3 control levels for your mid-range. So if you may find that it is a little aggressive in some aspects, you have control of that, again, via that passive crossover network. Of course, in a perfect world, we're going to run active with the DSP so we can really dial it into our specific preferences. But if a DSP is not an option, you actually do have controls on the passive network, which I feel a lot of times are actually overlooked. Instead of going to a source unit and boosting your treble.
Hookers are in the door.
I know.
They put him in the wrong spot. Brandon in Facebook was saying he always tries to keep him in the car, which is a great
Absolutely.
place so you can use this adjustability. It drives me nuts when people say, yeah, the mid-range is a little forward. We'll just knock it down. Well, how do you do that? On the crossover. Oh, I can't get to that. Ah! It's a great feature that you completely threw away by putting it in the door.
Yeah, I mean, instead of boosting treble or mid-range on your source unit, trying to turn up the amplifier, stuff that could cause clipping or other issues, it's built into the passover network. So let's try to take advantage of that and prevent other issues that could happen by doing unnecessary boosting at the source or amplifier level.
So you're saying just don't set them in the middle every time and then hide the crossovers away.
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, obviously from a retail perspective, we would find out what the customer's looking for. Do you want it a little aggressive? Do you want it a little more neutral sounding? And you make that initial setting, listen to it with them in the vehicle. And if they want a little more, you have access to the crossovers and you make those quick changes by changing the plugs inside the network itself. So very easy.
It's not a good one, but it's a hybrid.
Yeah.
That you run the extra wire through behind the door panel into the kick panel before you finish the installation. You sit down and you adjust it. And then if you have to bury it back in there, you just tuck it back in after you've made the adjustments and listen to it. it does require taking a door off an extra time, but at least you get some level of adjustment rather than throwing it all away. And I wanted to bring it up because the reality is it's hard sometimes to get that additional wire through the door jamb because it's really tight in there and there's other wires, and to drill another hole, it's concerning. People don't really want to do that, and I do get it. But it is a shame to throw away such a great feature set on the crossover to be able to make those adjustments and really tune the system for the customer or the listener, whoever it may be, so
just a couple of ways of thinking about it anyway, that's all.
Yep, no, very good points. So moving on to the C5 lineup. Prior to C7, this was without a doubt my favorite lineup. This is what I ran in my car. And just very, there we go. The rare C7 570 coax, or C5 570 coaxial.
That's true, yeah. It's awesome. Love this product.
What's funny about C5 is, I mean, it looks just like kind of like a boring speaker, black cone, a gray frame, but there is a lot that actually went into it, and it is without a doubt a very well-refined, detailed speaker. One of the key aspects of the C5 lineup is that we do use Kurt Mueller cones and suspensions, and the work that goes into the mineral-filled poly cone that's used on C5s is a lot. And a question that comes up a lot, especially when you start to get into the more expensive lineups like C5 and C7, if you guys don't know, every single JL Audio speaker we currently have is a polypropylene-based cone material. And there are a couple reasons for that, especially when you get to the top end. I get asked often as a trainer when I'm out in the field, why didn't you guys do some exotic material? Why is it polypropylene? And there's a couple reasons for it. One, Lucio and his team has worked with polypropylene for close to 40 years, if not longer. They know how it's going to react. They know the positives. They know the negatives. They know where specific frequencies could start to have trouble. And it really helps the design process when you're working with the material that you know how it's going to respond, and you can kind of work around all of that. The other thing we found was a lot of the exotic materials where they'll tend to start to break up. That's around that key crossover point with the tweeter. And to correct that, I think our website, we say it adds color to the top end. It's not the natural response or recording that's supposed to be there. It either requires a rather aggressive passive crossover network or a lot of equalization adjustment using a DSP. And in a perfect world, you want to minimize any work that's done when it comes to dealing with the speakers. So with polypropylene, we know where that breakup point of the material is going to be, and it's in a range our team is comfortable with, that it's not going to require an over-the-top passive crossover network, or if you're going active, a ridiculous amount of extra tuning to try to correct the speaker's behavior. At the end of the day, polypropylene is a great material if you know how to work with it right. Lucio and his team, the geometry of the cones, the way they build everything, you can make this extremely light, low mass material just as rigid as these exotic materials if you do the geometry of it right, the control of it right. And I think they pretty much got that down pat, and they're comfortable with it. And that tells me something. If they're comfortable with how this material is going to behave on a higher end product, it's good. They know this, and they know the pros and the cons and how to work around all that and develop a fantastic speaker.
I think what you can summarize on that is that, when you're engineering a product for a solution, you want to focus on engineering the product for the solution, not engineer around the parts of the product. And a lot of the time, some of the more exotic materials, while they do offer some distinct advantages over, a more common material like poly, they also offer some drawbacks that if you have to spend a lot of engineering effort to get around the drawbacks that wouldn't be there with a material that doesn't have that many drawbacks, well, it becomes a very good choice for us to use, and that's why we've chosen it for forever. At this point, we're really good at it, and we figured it out. There's a special formulation and all that other stuff. It just doesn't have all the, the joke is the unobtainium, all the fancy stuff that just looks really good on a spec sheet. But in this case, what we've done with C5. I saw some of the comments in the chat there. Steve Moss over in the UK, he points out that back in the day when there was a bunch of sound quality competition, C5 dominated for good reason. It sounds fantastic. And Brandon, he mentioned that he only just recently took C5 out, and he took it out to go with C7, which is right. You get it. Yeah, C5 is fantastic, and really the only step up would be a C7 level product, as we'll talk about in a moment.
But yeah, very, very nice, high quality 3/4 inch silk dome tweeters. Again, just a very smooth, dynamic. I remember my wife when she got in my old car that had the C5s in it. She was just blown away. I was playing a couple jazz songs, and she was like, "Wow!" She closed her eyes, sat in my driver's seat, and said, "Wow!" It was like they were right in front of her. It was just a very natural sounding response, and that's one of the things I love about C5. You got some flexibility as well. You have the 3-way option, the C5 653s, where you get that 4-inch mid-range in addition to the tweeter and the 6.5-inch woofer. And again, high quality crossovers. You have 4 tweeter and 3 mid-range options and a dedicated pad. Oh, perfect. I mean, that's a key element. A 5x7 woofer is going to have a totally different response than a 6.5. So you can't run with the same crossover network on that because the speakers themselves behave completely differently. And those attention to details. The different crossover network for the 3-way system. Again, we now have different responses in the frequency bandwidth that we're dealing with, and all of that's handled by specific crossovers. But, again, very nice lineup. You have the coaxial options, which I went active with in my car. You can still use the passive crossover network that comes with them. But, again, you have the options, passive or active for the coaxials, components. You've got the 3-way option. C5s, they are engineered in-house, but these actually are manufactured in Germany for us. So, just a really nice, well-rounded speaker system. I think for performance to cost, I think these are a steal. These are very, very nice speakers.
The performance ratios in the line, without a doubt.
Yeah. And now we move to the big dog, the C7 series. Man, a lot of work went into C7. It's an understatement. It's a 3-year clean sheet design, which means nothing's been recycled from old products. So nothing from ZR, XR, C5, C3. These are literally ground up speakers. And what's unique about C7, they are sold a la carte, so no passive crossovers with them. And you're going to buy each driver individually. So these are designed to be run active. And we'll talk about that in a bit after we talk about the speakers themselves, why we went with that approach. But as we discussed earlier, like all of the other speakers in the family, the C7 350 mid-range and the C7 650 woofer do use a mineral-filled polypropylene cone. A very rigid cone. And really, one of the details, some of our insiders may know about this, but we wanted to do something different than just black poly for the C7s. We wanted to, work with marketing a bit to make them pop a little more on the boards. And if you were at the launch...
People complaining about black.
Yeah. If you were at the launch in the Vegas when we did our C7 launch at the Palms, you may remember seeing on display C7s with a kind of a teal bluish color cone. And that was what we were going to do. Originally, the original test speakers were the black cones that you see now. And those speakers were what we used for the demo of the C7. After the pre-production ones were done, we decided let's make them let's change it to blue because it'll help make them pop, marketing, pictures, all the good reasons. But what we found was when you add that dye, when you change the color of a material, it changes the mass and the response of the speaker. And when we went to that blue cone, it didn't measure. I guess you could say it didn't measure as well as the black, but at the end of the day, it didn't measure to what Lucio wanted it to measure to. And because that
a measurable difference was the main thing, and like Rob said, if you have a material that you measure and get the performance you're looking for, and then you add something to it, by definition, you've changed it. Right? It's now different. And we never thought that the color would make that kind of a difference. It's the same material. We just injected some color into it. But there was a measurable difference. And it was probably still really, really good, but it wasn't as good. And when it's this level of product, something that's not as good as it could have been is a detriment. And we're just not going to do that. Certainly not on the C7. And for those that don't know JL Audio that well, when you see that magic number 7 in there, that's a very, very special product. Anything that bears that number is very, very special, and the C7 is definitely no exception to that rule.
Yeah, I mean that's the kind of attention to detail. That's why we ended up going back to that black mineral filled poly, because that was the measurement that Lucio and the team wanted and what they decided was the best for that product. So kind of a cool little side story if you didn't know about that, or if you've ever seen pictures of blue C7s and wonder what happened to them. One thing we're extremely proud about with the C7 family is that the mid-range speaker and the mid-bass woofer are built in our South Florida facility. The C7 650 is built on a dedicated assembly line there by our talented team. And really, though, the magic is watching the C7 350 mid-ranges be built. Yeah, I never realized, I know speaker work, there's a lot of delicate work. I see it. But on a 3.5-inch driver, the detail of like a perfectly bent 90-degree lead wire that's then soldered here and this and that. When we had done our rep alliance a couple years ago where we brought reps in, our sales reps in for a tour of the facility, we wanted to show them the build process on the C7s because no one had been in the facility since we started building them in-house. And you couldn't see anything because, we're talking about like a little tiny space. So we had to put an HD camera in the assembly area and put it on a 50-inch TV because otherwise you couldn't see the work that was being done. And we've taken some of our most skilled and talented people in speaker production and specifically trained them for the C7 350 mid-range assembly. There's 2 stations. I think we have 2 or 3 people that are trained. Originally, we had 1 station with only 1 lady who was trained. And we kept our fingers crossed every day she didn't call in sick because we wouldn't have C7 350 production if she wasn't in the building that day. So we've trained a couple other of our more senior top people in speaker production. And between a mix of automation and their hands, they, hand assemble the good majority of the speaker that you see there. Of course, there is some jigs and there's some mechanical stuff for the adhesive, but a lot of it's by hand. And again, you can see how small that speaker is in her hand and making the perfect 90-degree bends on those lead wires, gluing the spider to the coil former. It is a lot of intricate, detailed work. And I can't stress enough. They do an amazing job building these. But we're just, yeah.
Sort of on is most, if not all, of the fixturing that's being worked on there was developed with our engineering team and created in-house by our machine shop. So literally every single aspect of this, from the design to the build and even the machines that are used to build it, it's all been done by us, every bit of it. This is about as purpose-built as you could possibly get. And you're right about the level of detail and all of that. It's, building a bigger woofer, there's a lot more room to get in there and do what you need to do. With something this tiny, it's just incredible. And Rob talks a lot about when we do tours of the facility, and it's one of our favorite things to do. But I love going back there, and there's usually, I call them like cookie racks, where there's a bunch of drivers that they finish, and you can take a look. And I always look for the ones that have defects. And that may sound funny, but it's like, very often we have people that are with us on the tour. So you pull it off and they usually have an arrow pointing to where the defect is. And, I usually look at it first and just kind of smile and I'll show it to them and say, what do you see that's wrong here? And they'll look really, really close and like, well, it looks like there's a little mark there. I said, that's right. That's why no one else will ever see it. It's been flagged. and it will go because it's got a blend. But you have to look really, really close at it, and that I love, and that's to me the detail. Obviously the assembly, we're always going to get that right, but when our people are picking up little tiny things that are, like a speck of dust is what it looks like, but that's enough to say no, that's not going to go out. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I get all jazzed up every time I think about all the cool stuff that happens back there. Another different aspect on the C7 is on the tweeters. It's a 1-inch ceramic coated tweeter, and the ceramic coating is actually a material called corundum, which is it's like a crystalline aluminum oxide. And essentially what we've done is taken an aluminum dome, and the corundum is essentially just a powder. And they put it on, they throw it on the dome, it goes in a machine. You see like lightning bolts and all this crazy stuff, and it solidifies this powder into a ceramic coating. And what that does is it takes what's already a rigid material like aluminum, and it makes it more rigid. So we have a more precise, more detailed tweeter. And I'll admit, I was a little nervous when I heard we were doing an aluminum dome on C7. Again, I'm more of a silk dome guy. I remember when I first got into car audio, listening to a lot of aluminum and titanium dome-based tweeters, and I would find after extended listening, I'd start to have a lot of fatigue. My ears would start to hurt. It would be annoying. So I was very nervous. And our team did such an amazing job with this S Silk Roll Surround. Again, like the C1, that silk surround tames the tweeter. I almost look at these as like a hybrid where you get that extra energy from the aluminum, but you still get some smooth, neutral characteristics from the silk as well. And I remember after I did my C7 system in my Acura, I at the time I was working out of my house, and now my office is only a couple miles away, so I don't do a lot of long listening in my vehicle. So I remember we were doing a training in Phoenix at Mobile Solutions for some of our international partners. And it's a 6.5-hour drive. And I was like, all right, this is going to be the first time I'm going to listen to these for more than like half an hour, 45 minutes. And my VXI system wasn't fully dialed in yet either. So I was a little nervous, how am I going to feel after 6.5 hours? And man, I pulled into the Moxie hotel parking lot in Tempe with a big smile on my face. And I was stoked, man. I had no fatigue. I was railing on it. These are just very, very nice, smooth, but tons of energy thanks to that aluminum dome, very precise. Even the housing of the tweeter is designed to improve the efficiency and a certain bandwidth of the tweeter. A lot of thought went into these, and they're worth every single penny. And that's coming from someone who's not a big fan of metal dome based tweeters. These are without a doubt some of the best out there in my opinion.
I have to agree with you, Rob. I've taken a few road trips with mine, and they're definitely... It's funny. Well, I won't say that I start singing along with the music in there, but if I was to start singing along with the music going on in there, you end up being like, wow, I can't even hear myself because I've got it going on so loud, but it's not harsh, so it's not like hurting your ears. You just realize it when the ambient noises of your voice and everything else going on are all pretty much muted in there.
It's an excellent point that you bring up, that the perceived amplitude of a system is not as accurate as you might think when you're jamming out. Right? What you're usually going to pick up on is stresses from within the system. And speakers are almost always going to be the most obvious version of that, as well as obviously pushing the amplifier too hard. So when you have a system that's dialed in really, really good, it's not going to sound as loud as one that's not dialed in really good, oddly enough. The one that's not dialed in, you're going to be getting into the treble zones a lot earlier, and it's going to sound loud but not very clear. And you'll really pick up on that the longer you listen. And I think what Kevin was describing is really funny, because I've done that. When you're on a road trip, you got the volume up and you got road noise, first of all, so you have to overcome that. And you're kind of going along with the music, and maybe adding your own words. But when you get to your destination and you get out, you're like, holy crap, that was a lot louder than I thought it was. And that's why, if it's dialed in really well, it doesn't sound like it's straining, because it's not. It's all just done right. And the C7 is... just a final comment from me for right now anyway. when my son listens to my Jeep that I have the C7 in there, he's like, how come I can hear things in your car that I can't hear in mine? That's what C7 does. So some of that detail and resolution, it comes out with all the different materials that Rob described and the optimization of the drivers. That's what you're getting. It's not necessarily louder, but it does bring out that level of detail that it's almost freaky that you could hear the same song in two different systems, pick up things that you never heard before. And it's right. It's not like you've added something, you've removed something. You've removed a lot of the things that would normally mask those things. And that, Rob mentioned earlier at the start of the presentation, maybe is a good point to end it. That lots of people can throw things together and make a speaker say, hey, here we go. But to make a really good speaker, it's not easy. It requires understanding of all the interrelated parts. And there may not be a lot of those parts, especially compared to like an amplifier, which makes each one of them that much more important.
Yeah. I think what you mentioned there, Steve, also kind of goes back to why there's no passive crossovers on the C7. These are extremely detailed speakers. And I remember when we did the launch, I'm going to close my keynote out now. But I remember when we did the launch in Vegas, the guys from Mobile Electronics Magazine were interviewing Dwayne. And Dwayne is our VP of speaker engineering. So, of course, they asked him, why no passive crossovers? And what he said to me, at first it kind of put me back when I was like, wow, it makes so much sense. And what he said was, if you think about an ultra high-end speaker like C7, a passive crossover network, even the best passive network out there, you're still using caps, coils, and resistors. And even with the highest quality components, you're still going to have degradation and loss somewhere. So with a product like C7, using a passive network, it's like putting a veil over the speaker. And why would you do that? You're now robbing the speaker of its performance. And when you think about it like that, it makes a lot of sense. If we can electrically control all that stuff through a DSP, we are getting the pure designed sound from the speaker without any compromise or potential losses that even the best passive network will give you because of the materials that are required in it. So again, it's all about purity.
It's perfect what you just shared. Totally agree. And it was actually a question in Facebook regarding this. So it was excellent that you covered it. But a passive crossover is a filter. And by definition, a filter is interfering, so to speak, with whatever signal goes through it. And that type of interference, that type of alteration is something that we didn't want with the C7. And if we were to do something as a passive network, and we're not, but if we were, we would choose the utmost best components that we could possibly get. And all said and done, when you add up the cost of all of that, that's probably the difference between a DSP-based amplifier and a non-DSP-based amplifier. Or to put it a different way, you could buy an external DSP for the same money as the passives, and we would rather you do that. So if you really need a passive system, C5, baby, all day long, and it will not disappoint you. But if you want to step up to C7, we're going to ask you to use a proper DSP-based product like a VXI or even like an XD with a tweak. That'd be fine. So if you already have an existing analog, non-DSP-based amplifier, you could use something like a tweak or heaven forbid somebody else's DSP product to dial those things in. But we don't have any current plans that I'm aware of to do a passive network for C7 for every reason that Rob is sharing with us. Do we have any other questions that I missed in it while I was rambling?
There's a pretty big in-depth question about phase in there from David. I started typing it out, and then I'm like, then I started typing it out.
So that may go beyond the scope. But by the way, right now we're just at the top of the hour, a little bit past. So technically we're kind of in overtime. And we do appreciate everybody being a part of our session today. And we encourage you to stick around while we chat a little bit longer. But if you do have to go, we totally understand. We won't be too offended. But technically the structured presentation is done. Now it's going to be some cleanup with questions and answers as much as we can. I don't know if we can get too deep into the phase comment that you're talking about there, Kevin. But we'll try. But there is something while you're thinking about how we're going to answer that. Someone asked if we've ever used C7 in like a home theater demo or a home audio presentation. Kevin put in the Facebook chat, but I'll share with everybody in case they're not looking there. Not specifically, other people might have, but as far as JL Audio, when we launched the product, we had a nice little suite up at in Las Vegas where we introduced the product. And the best way to do that, you can't really get a car in the suite, not easily anyway. But we built some speakers using the C7 product as a three-way, and we flanked it with a couple of the Fathom subwoofers because you gotta, right? And we actually used an XD amplifier and a tweak to dial it in. And we did some demonstrations for lots of different people. Many of them are our partners, some of them friends and family kind of thing. And there was one person from a magazine who shall go nameless because he wasn't there representing the magazine. He was just there as a friend. And he was listening to these speakers. And when, we were done doing a presentation, he made a comment. He says, well, when will these be available? And whatever the answer was, I don't know. And he says, and is that the only cabinet that you'll offer? And we just kind of looked and we said, what do you mean? These are car speakers. And he like turned white. He's like, that's for a car? He's like, that sounds better than anything I heard in the home audio show. I said, woo, okay. Well, that's a really big compliment. So yeah, they are that good. They are absolutely reference grade quality. And I'm very fortunate to have it in my car. And I love listening to them as often as I can. And, you almost look for longer drives.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answered the question on that. So Kevin, where are we at? Do we want to try to do the phase thing or?
Real quick, I do want to add in because we brought up older Chevys, and if you want something a little higher end, you can squeeze a 3.5 and a tweeter in that that little 4x6 area there. So you can squeeze a C7 mid-range and tweeter in there. She's tight, but it'll fit. Yeah, let's get into it a little bit. There's no real other questions I see that are in depth. We got Steve wants them for his house too. Let's see. Josh is looking for YouTube stuff.
Going back to the demo real quick, man, I remember when we were setting that demo up, I had heard them in engineering before we had gone to Vegas, but it was like a really crude setup, wasn't dialed in. I remember when we got to the Palms, watching Manville sit in the sweet spot, making some adjustments, and I remember him smiling. I was like, that caught me off because, Manville's not normally one to show a lot of emotion. So I asked him, what's up? And it had to be a Dire Straits song because he said it was one of his reference songs that he knows like the back of his hand. And I said, well, what's going on? He's like, I'm hearing depth in the staging I've never noticed in this song before. And that was like the fact that that demo, even though we dialed that room in, it was still a weird shaped room. It wasn't perfect. And like, for Manville, who's got one of the most critical ears out there, to pick up on stuff in the recording, I was like, okay, we're good then. These, and then I heard the demo in the sweet spot, and it didn't even matter where you were in the room. That whole room sounded great. Yeah, that was such an awesome demo.
Sure was. I think the speakers are somewhere over in our training area. We'll have to blow some dust off of them and get them out again. Up.
I mean, if you're going to use them at the office, I guess you got to take them home now, right?
Well, since I'm not going to the office regularly right now, I will, consider bringing them home. One of the perks, I guess, right?
So we keep getting a lot of questions on any plans for a larger C7 mid. We've got it like 3 or 4 times on here.
If it's okay to rant, because I guess we're in the bonus time anyway. Rob had mentioned a couple of our previous lines of speakers that we've done over the years, and some of the earlier ones we had the TR, VR, and XR line. Those were the original, other than the CS ones that I showed at the beginning. But those were the first like real serious significant effort into that product category. And then over time, we kind of mixed things up a little bit, and VR kind of went away. And oddly enough, VR kind of merged with XR a little bit and became C5, right? So that's kind of where that one came from. We took the tweeter from the VR and a lot of the engineering work from the the XR driver, and that turned into the C5 product, kind of the best of both worlds with a step up in performance. And then we developed the ZR or ZR for the European friends. So the ZR product was a step up, and it was, it came in a really nice packaging, and it took everything and brought the tolerances really close. Fantastic level of performance, and limited number of SKUs because they're higher end product and a lot more expensive. So we did expand that line based on the same type of comments that we're getting today on the C7, and we did come up with the ZR800 mid-bass driver. And it truly was a mid-bass driver. It was not a woofer. The engineers were very clear to make sure that this is intended to be high pass at a lower frequency than a 6.5 would, but be a great transition from a larger subwoofer to that 6.5, or even the smaller drivers like a 4-inch or a 3.5. And we developed this product, and it was freaking awesome. The thing was incredible. The level of tight, accurate mid-bass was stunning. It was great, and nobody bought it. It's like we made this great product, and the sales was so low. It's like, the people even know that we have it? Oh yeah, we know, but it's not that common. So as soon as you discontinue a product, as soon as you get rid of it, it was, oh my god, it was my favorite product ever. And it's like, So we actually internally, we kind of kidded around. We should just bring that thing back and put the C7 logo on it and say, here you go. But it was that good. It was really designed from that same mindset, because we did want active crossovers on that back then. And a lot of the same thing that Rob shared with us about C7 did apply to the ZR800. And that too was built in our Miramar facility with the same level of detail. That was as close as we've gotten. But having said that, and everybody in Facebook that's asking for it, and many others, by the way, that have asked, I don't know that we're done with C7, but I have no exact roadmap of what's exactly coming. I do know that our engineers like the playground of C7 as a platform, and they for them it's great because they have freedom. There's always some kind of a budget, but it's not like a C1 where every choice has to be weighed against every penny that's being spent. With C7, we know it's going to be expensive, so we're going to have some freedom of choices on design, materials, and the duration of it. So they like playing in this sandbox, as I call it, because they can play around with some of the different ideas that they may want to explore. And our engineers are very coy about exactly what they're working on at any given point. So I'll be equally as coy and say, we're working on lots of different things. So how's that for a non-answer?
This is a good one. And the other thing that you got to think about too is, I had a newer Ford pickup truck that had, I could squeeze larger speakers in them if I wanted to. However, the depth getting into the window area and some of the other electronics and all of that stuff, you don't have a ton more room than what you would have, with that 6.5 there. So you got to also consider that. If you want a lot more performance, you're probably going to have a little bit deeper driver than the 6.5 is too. So you might have the diameter wise, but do you have the depth to be able to squeeze that guy in there too?
The mid bass from that C7 650 is phenomenal. I mean, if you do the install right, you seal your door properly, you decouple it with rings, and there's no air leaks or anything like that. My goodness, the mid bass in my car, especially when you get the subs dialed into it, it's unbelievable. So even though it's a 6.5, if you do it right and you follow the steps in our, I think we have an article on our help center, how to improve your mid bass. The key component to a lot of that is the installation. So if you put in a ZR800 into the door, but just left the door stock, you're not gaining anything you would get over the C7 650. And if you do the door right, you power it properly. C7 650, the mid bass is phenomenal. If you have not just the diameter, but depth where you could do that ZR800, go for it. But I think, what you would gain you'd be surprised. It probably isn't going to be a ton much more than what you're getting out of that C7 if it's installed properly.
I couldn't agree more. That's one of my pet peeves is, people, they want the highest level product from our company or any other company for that matter, and then they don't want to really get a really good installation done. They don't see the importance of it or the need for it, and it may be a bit extreme, but I would rather do like a C1 or a C2 and spend a ton of money on deadening material and making the door right and doing all those things to the highest level around that more basic level product than spend the money on a C5 or a C7 and just throw it in the factory location and not do anything else. It's a bit extreme, but I think it's a good point to be made that, I think all of it kind of scales up. You don't spend all your money just on the subwoofer and then don't spend anything on the amplifiers or the main speakers. You should bring all of it up equally and do the install to support it correctly. Because that's really where the magic comes in. A company like JL Audio and many of our competitors, we work really hard to make some fantastic product. But if you don't put them together in a way that allows them to perform to their highest levels of ability, what's the point? You could get away with less expensive product and don't do a good job. You know what I mean? So, it was Steve earlier in the Facebook chat. He brought up the old IASCA days, and IASCA was a sound off competition organization that was once very, very popular. I think they're still around, but some of the popularity is not there. But it was an opportunity for installers and consumers and do-it-yourselfers to get together and kind of show off what they could do. They design and build these cars and dial them in and make them sound really, really fantastic. Well, when you go to these events, very often there's a lot of waiting around while the judges go from car to car or the cars go through the lanes. There's a lot of downtime, chit chat, hanging out with the friends or whatnot, eating a lot of bad food, that kind of stuff. Well, audio guys, we get together, we talk about ideas of how we can do this better or that better. And I remember the guys, we were all talking around about what we would do to make a competition really interesting. And so as a consumer, some consumers don't have unlimited budgets, right? Of course, we work for a manufacturer. We just go to the shelf and pull some product off, right? So we can build a demo car that way, right? It's relatively easy. And shops, similarly, they have access to all this great merchandise, but consumers, they have to weigh those choices very carefully. So we kind of came up with the idea of the IROC type competition. And if you're into racing, you know that the International Race of Champions, all the cars are the same. Effectively, there's some minor modifications, but effectively they all have the same platform, and it's the driver who makes the difference. So in the car audio world, what we said was we should do what we then called the Radio Shack class. In other words, it's not about brands anymore. Radio Shack, for those that don't know, was a chain of electric retailers that they had all the various parts for electronic circuits. They had a bunch of like really basic audio stuff and speaker wires and stuff. All of it was pretty basic. So we had the idea, we'll do the Radio Shack class, that all the product has to come from Radio Shack. And if an installer can make the Radio Shack stuff sound good, well, that's an installer you want to do business with, because imagine if he had the freedom of a great product, what they could do. And I thought the concept, of course, the execution would be ridiculous, but the concept was really good. It was a way that the installers could show what they could do with the product. And then the product, of course, is important. But if I can make a really basic product sound fantastic, imagine what I can do with the top of the line stuff. And I like that mentality. I like that idea that the installer is an intricate part of the actual success of the sound system itself. So.
I mean, I totally agree. Like, I'll use C2 and C5s as an example here because tonality and characteristic wise, they're similar. I would take a properly installed C2, which means soundproofing the doors, decoupling the speaker with foam rings, over C5s just put in the factory location. You're going to get better performance from those properly set up C2s than just a C5 thrown into a factory door, because it all comes together. Again, it's that application-based engineering that they're designed for. And if you seal off the door, you take care of the rattles and vibrations, we're instantly going to get better mid-bass response because we've taken care of that. If we decouple it, which means we put that foam ring around the speaker, all of that energy goes into the car now instead of being trapped behind the door panel. All of that affects the speaker's performance. So, for me, I would take a lower price speaker and pay for a better installation. You're probably going to get better results than that more expensive speaker just slapped in the door.
I just had the same conversation or similar conversation with a buddy of mine from Texas that's looking to get a system installed, and he was really dead set on C5 and HD, but he couldn't afford some of the other stuff. So I told him go C3 VXI and spend that extra money in getting your install done a little bit more deadened or dampened and properly installed, and you're going to end up having a lot better experience at the end of the day.
Right on. So question came up in the WebEx chat that I wanted to address with the group, whoever's left anyway. There's a request for like a 2.5 or a 3-inch mid-range at a more moderate price point. Obviously the C7 is a great product, but it's not exactly in everyone's budget. And there is a larger and larger number of vehicles that really could benefit from a driver like that. And we do have some more basic solutions, but I think what James is asking for is something more like a C3 level product of that, like a wide bandwidth 2.5 or 3-inch driver. And there's been lots and lots of conversation about developing a driver very similar to what you're asking for, James. Don't, again, have a timeline on that. It sounds really terrible to say, but our timeline for development of speaker product particularly, it follows as we can. There's obstacles that we have to overcome through the engineering process, and we can never foresee where those problems may come in. And to make a really high quality version of a 2.5 or 3-inch, there's lots of obstacles. And yes, we are working on things like that all the time. So I don't have a time frame, but I just wanted to call it out, especially with everybody watching, that yeah, we hear these requests, and there's lots of work being done behind the scene. And hopefully soon we'll be able to show something, but I just don't know when. But we do hear you, and thank you for bringing it up.
Corey on Facebook went right to a 17W7.
Because he likes that number 7, right? And he also knows that we like the odd size speakers, right? 13s and 13.5 or whatever. So yeah. Oh, yeah, 17-inch. Jeez.
I'm trying to think about not only the airspace that would take up, but could you imagine the mounting depth of a 17W7?
Corey was asking that. Corey, go talk to the UPS guy. See what he thinks of a 17W7.
Hopefully you can accept pallets where you're at.
Yeah, that's funny stuff. W7s are amazing drivers. Even today, they've been out there for more than a couple of years. And there's times sometimes you'll listen to a well-done subwoofer system around a W7. It's like, wow, that thing's really freaking amazing. And I do know that there's other products that are technically more competent in terms of amplitude, but I don't think there's anything out there that can touch it in terms of resolution at level. Again, there's all kinds of things to discuss when talking about a woofer, but really any speaker for that matter, that there's a balancing act of performance, right? So the W7s, the whole goal of that was to be able to deliver razor sharp, detailed, and accurate bass response to the lowest possible frequency at a level that no one had done before. And to this day, I think we've achieved those goals better than anybody else has. Have people been able to get louder? Yes, they've gotten louder, but they're not as detailed and accurate as a W7. That's the trick, and that's the magic of it. And a lot of that same mentality was applied on like a C7 level product, hence the namesake. The detail and accuracy of that driver doesn't come at an insignificant cost. It comes at a very high cost, and the materials and the dialing in of all those interrelated parts. It's not easy.
I think it's a great point you brought up. I did see there was a question in the chat. Someone asked, what makes the W7 so good when this brand is louder and costs less? But like Steve said, there are brands that are louder. But when you look at a W7, it's not just the fact that it's the refinement, the detail, but you got to remember when you get into the lower frequencies, every time you drop an octave for equal loudness, you need 4 times the excursion. So to play, if we're X dB at 80 hertz, X dB at 40 hertz, that woofer has to move 4 times as much. To get down to 20 hertz, that's 8 times as much from where it was at 80. So when you start thinking about that, that's where the W7 comes in. Yes, it's big, it's beefy, it can do SPL type stuff, but that's not what it was designed for. It was designed to really, those low frequencies where a lot of woofers can struggle, it can play those just as loud and just as tight and just as detailed as those upper frequencies that it's going to play around 80 hertz, 100 hertz. So it's extremely well-rounded no matter where it is within its bandwidth, and it's going to give you pretty darn close to equal amplitude across the board of the frequencies it can play, which a lot of speakers just can't do that.
There's honestly, being the freshest face here and coming across, and the first time you listen to one of those, like there's nothing else like it. I mean, there just isn't. I mean, it's just an amazing driver, and there just isn't anything that even comes close to the experience. And I'm going to say the experience that it gives you, because it's not just the hearing experience, but it's the feeling experience. It's the bringing you in. I mean, it just
It's different too, though, because the purity of it, you don't hear the mechanical distortion you hear from a lot of subs. So when you first hear it, it's kind of weird because you're like, oh, I've never heard bass like this before, because you're not hearing a lot of the mechanical distortion. It's just so pure, which is, why it's the base of the Gotham and Fathom products. It's just such an amazing listening experience.
I remember when the first prototypes were coming out of engineering, Manville and I had an opportunity to listen to it in one of the vehicles that we had set up. And, we were all excited. It's the W7, we finally get to hear this thing that we've been working on for so darn long, right? And we started going through, and it was, we used to play these things. They were silver shiny things, CDs, I think they were called. It's a long time ago, right? So, so we had this stack of CDs of all the different demo tracks that we have been playing, right? And we just kept rifling through, listening to some of the tracks, and we kept looking at each other. And at one point, I said, "What?" He's like, "It doesn't sound the same." And I said, "Yeah, I know. There's something weird about the way it sounds." And we kept listening and kept listening, and it's like we kind of looked at each other like, it's right. It's like for the first time we heard it right. And the analogy I used was, I wear contacts, Robert. You wear glasses, right? And imagine if your entire life you didn't have glasses, right? You didn't have them, and the world looked the way it looked, and you just thought that was just normal. And then one day you got your glasses and you start looking around like, so that's what this all looks like. That's what trees look like. That's what, the little gravel in the road looks like. You're seeing the detail in the world around you for the first time. And it's because the blurriness that your vision had could be removed. But the thing that Robert's describing, there's mechanical distortions that are present in every driver. Subwoofers, especially when you're asking them to move so far, there's an enormous amount of distortion that's present, not just in the moving suspension, but in the electromechanical system as well. There's distortion. There's a lot of lost information, and that distortion is so prevalent in all products that it masks the way bass is supposed to sound. You can't get away from it because it's part of the design. Until you start optimizing it, and when you start removing some of the layers of distortion, what you're hearing for the first time is like when seeing for the first time the detail and resolution. And it's eerie at first. And we've heard a lot of complaints that people, I don't like the sound of a W7. I get it. I totally understand where they're coming from. It's not that it's bad, it's different, and you just don't like it. Okay, no problem. But once you come to the realization that it's actually really right, it's like woof. And the experience that both Kevin and Rob described, that's exactly what we lived that day in that car that we were listening to. That holy cow, we went for the whole thing. Is there something wrong? No, it's just righter than it's ever been. And it's very much that visceral feeling and that detail and accuracy. And to stay a little bit more focused on what we've done today with our training session, C7 is very similar to that in terms of how revealing it can be. You'll hear little whispers in the voices and the sibilance in sound and the details at the size of the recording studio or the concert hall, wherever the recording was. You'll pick up on nuances because the distortion levels have been pushed down so low that they become almost inaudible or almost immeasurable. And that's really the goal of a lot of this stuff. And that type of detail, that doesn't just show up. It's very, very hard to achieve.
I don't see anything else on Facebook. Question, is there stealth box development featuring the W7? W7
Wouldn't be very stealth, would it?
Yeah.
I was going to say we're developing one for the under seat of a Toyota Tacoma.
All kidding aside, back in the day, we did play around with like massive versions of some of the stealth boxes, and one had 3 W6s in a Camaro. It had a big fiberglass molded enclosure with a motorized actuator and a whole nine. And that's about as close to a W7-ish type stealth box that we would ever attempt. Of course, it had a price tag to go with it. The sales were pretty low, but it was fun to explore that as an opportunity. But it's unlikely you'll see a W7 in anything with the word stealth in it.
All righty. We are well into the bonus hour.
Well into the bonus, and I think it's time to change the pop out for something a little bit different, right? Everyone, thank you so much for being a part of today's session. We did run long, but I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure Rob and Kevin will agree. It was nice to have that kind of a chat. The stroll down memory lane earlier was a lot of fun too. So the parting words I have for everybody is, if you like the sessions that we're doing and you want some additional ones, let us know. Also, let us know what kind of content you would like us to present. More information on a certain topic, let us know. If there's a better time or the week that works better for these sessions to be live, please let us know. We are very receptive. We are here for you. We want to provide content that's meaningful to you at a time that's beneficial to you. So let us know what you want, and we'll do our best to accommodate. And I'll say my goodbye, and I'll let Kevin and Rob do that. We'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.
Have a good night, everybody.